The Salt Creek Massacre, Graham, Texas, 1871. Imagine being just hours away from death, not knowing that 150 warriors are watching your every move across the vast Texas prairie. This is exactly what happened to General William Sherman in 1871 when he unknowingly rode past what would become one of the bloodiest wagon train massacres in Texas history. Welcome to Native Legends and History Stories. Subscribe for more untold tales of the American frontier. In the spring of 1871, the Salt Creek Prairie near Graham, Texas became the stage for a brutal confrontation. The incident, known as the Salt Creek Massacre or the Warren Wagon Train Raid, began with what seemed like a routine supply mission, but ended in a tragedy that would echo through generations. Captain Julian Fields, a respected businessman from Mansfield, Tarrant County, had assembled what many considered the finest mule train in the territory. His impressive caravan consisted of 6 teams, each powered by 6 muscular mules, 36 in total. These weren't ordinary pack animals. They were carefully selected specimens, representing a significant investment in both money and preparation. The wagons themselves gleamed with newness, their sturdy wheels and fresh harnesses speaking to Fields' attention to detail and quality. The operation was well planned and seemingly secure. Fields and his business partner R.A. had secured a lucrative government contract to supply flour and grain to military outposts. The venture promised steady work and profitable returns, with opportunities to haul additional cargo. During downtime, their teamsters were experienced, men well armed, and prepared for the dangers of frontier travel. The caravan departed from Jacksboro, Texas, their wagons heavy with flour, bound for Fort Griffin in Shackelford County. Each wagon was manned by 2 teamsters, creating a team of 12 men under the leadership of a man named Long. They had no way of knowing they were being watched. As the sun began its descent on that fateful evening, the wagon train was crossing an exposed prairie ridge on Salt Creek Prairie, 9 miles from present-day Graham. Without warning, the peaceful scene erupted into chaos as approximately 150 Kiowa warriors emerged from hiding. Leading this massive war party were 3 of the most feared chiefs on the frontier, Satanta Satank and Big Tree. The teamsters reacted quickly, their practiced hands guiding the wagons into a defensive circle, a standard frontier tactic that had saved countless lives before. But this time the odds were overwhelmingly against them. Despite their weapons and determination, 12 men stood little chance against 150 warriors. The battle was swift and merciless. In the end, only 2 teamsters managed to escape, racing through the gathering darkness toward Fort Richardson to report the massacre. The aftermath revealed the brutality of the attack. Among the dead was a wounded teamster who had suffered an especially cruel fate, tied to a wagon wheel and burned alive as the raiders set fire to the entire train. The flames that consumed the wagons and their valuable cargo lit up the prairie night, casting an eerie glow that could be seen for miles. What makes this event even more remarkable was a near miss that could have changed the course of American history. Just hours before the attack, General William Tecumseh Sherman, one of the most prominent military figures of the era, had passed along the same road during his inspection tour of frontier posts. Had he delayed his journey by mere hours, he might have encountered the same fate as the unfortunate teamsters. The timing of his passage through this dangerous territory, during the tumultuous Reconstruction period when the South's pleas for protection often went unheeded, would prove to be a crucial twist of fate that would ultimately impact future Indian policy in the region. Sherman's narrow escape from the massacre proved to be a turning point in frontier policy. Standing at Fort Richardson, the general who had once marched through Georgia now faced a different kind of warfare. The evidence of savage brutality lay scattered across Salt Creek Prairie: charred wagon remnants, personal belongings, and the remains of murdered teamsters. For Sherman, this was no longer about distant reports or second-hand accounts. The reality of frontier violence had nearly claimed his own life. At Fort Richardson, the surviving teamsters arrived with their harrowing tale. Sherman immediately dispatched Colonel Mackenzie to investigate. Mackenzie, known for his methodical approach, rode out to the massacre site. The scene that greeted him confirmed every detail of the survivors' account. the circular wagon formation, the signs of desperate defense, and the grim evidence of the final moments of those who didn't escape. Sherman's presence at Fort Richardson attracted prominent local citizens who saw an opportunity to make their case directly to a powerful federal authority. A delegation of respected community leaders gathered to meet him. W. Duke, R.J. Winters, Judge J.R. Robinson, W. McConnell himself, a former Union soldier, Peter Hart, and General H. Gaines. These men weren't politicians seeking advantage. They were community leaders, witnessing their region's suffering firsthand. In a lengthy meeting, they laid out the stark reality of frontier life. Their testimony painted a picture of constant fear, settlers afraid to work their fields, children unable to play outside, women sleeping with weapons nearby. The victims they emphasized weren't combatants or political actors, but ordinary civilians, farmers, traders, government employees, women, and children. The delegation pointed out the bitter irony that while the federal government provided rations and supplies to the Indian tribes, these same tribes were attacking the very supply lines, delivering those provisions. Sherman, a hardened military commander who had seen the worst of the Civil War, listened intently. The evidence before him challenged the prevailing Eastern view of Indian relations. Here was proof that the current policy of appeasement was failing not just the settlers, but the very concept of civilized conduct. What happened next at Fort Sill on May 27th would remove any lingering doubts. As recorded in Colonel Smith's diary, later quoted in Will Barger's historical account, several Indian chiefs arrived at the agency to collect their government rations. Among them were the raid's leaders Satanta, Satank, and their allies Kicking Bird and Lone Wolf. What transpired then was extraordinary. In a display of either brazen confidence or cultural misunderstanding, Satanta approached Agent Tatum with what amounted to a boastful confession. Speaking with the pride of a warrior, recounting his victories, he detailed his role in what settlers called a massacre. He claimed personal command of the raid, boasted of killing the teamsters, and proudly mentioned the captured mules, 41 in total. To emphasize his leadership, he pointed out Satank and Big Tree, making it clear they had participated, but under his command with the certainty of a man who saw no wrong in his actions. He warned that anyone else claiming credit for the raid was lying. This confession, delivered so casually, while collecting rations from the very government whose citizens he had attacked, would prove to be a pivotal moment in the history of Indian-settler relations in Texas. The stark contrast between the government's conciliatory policy and the reality of frontier violence could no longer be ignored. The tension at Fort Sill escalated quickly after Agent Tatum reported Satana's boastful confession to General Sherman. Within hours, the mood in the fort shifted from routine to dangerous as Sherman summoned the Kiowa chiefs to his presence. The council room, typically a place of negotiation, now felt more like a courtroom. Satana's demeanor changed dramatically when confronted by Sherman. Gone was the proud warrior who had boasted of his victory. As Sherman declared his intention to arrest and try them in Texas, Satana's confidence crumbled. His voice took on a different tone as he began backpedaling, claiming he had merely accompanied younger warriors without participating in the killing. "I was there," he admitted, his eyes darting around the room, "but I killed no one the young men wanted to raid. And I only went to show them how to fight." He attempted to justify the attack by citing casualties among his own people, then tried to placate Sherman with promises of future peace. Sherman's response was swift and cutting. The general, standing tall and unmoved, condemned the attack as an act of cowardice. 150 warriors against 12 unarmed teamsters. He stated coldly, "If you want a real battle, my soldiers stand ready." The words hung heavy in the air as Satanta, faced with the prospect of trial in Texas, muttered that he would prefer a quick death by shooting. The atmosphere grew even more volatile when Kicking Bird, known for his diplomatic skills, rose to speak. His plea for Satanta's release came with an offer to return the stolen mules, but Sherman remained resolute. As if choreographed, 20 armed soldiers appeared at the building's entrance, their weapons at the ready. The sight sent a ripple of tension through the assembled Indians, nearly all of whom carried rifles and Colt revolvers. What followed was a silent dance of escalating threats. Lone Wolf, moving with slowness, distributed his weapons, passing his bow and arrows to one unarmed warrior and his six-shooter to another. The recipient of the bow immediately strung it, arrows at the ready, while Lone Wolf himself took position with his cocked rifle. The soldiers responded in kind, raising their weapons as the air grew thick with the possibility of bloodshed. Just as violence seemed inevitable, Satanta broke the tension. "No shoot, no shoot," he cried, raising his hands. Joined by others in a desperate attempt to prevent massacre, the soldiers held their fire, fingers still on triggers, as sweat beaded on everyone's foreheads. The relative calm was shattered by gunfire. Outside the fort, the sharp twang of a bowstring, followed by a cry of pain, signaled that a sentinel had been struck by an arrow. The response was immediate. A single shot rang out, and the warrior who had fired the arrow fell dead. The incident served as a brutal exclamation point to the day's tensions. In the aftermath, Sherman demanded the return of the stolen mules. Kicking Bird agreed, but when he left the fort to retrieve them, he discovered the Kiowa women, sensing danger, had fled with nearly all the animals. Only 8 mules remained, which the soldiers quickly secured. The episode marked a definitive shift in the power dynamic between the U.S. military and the Kiowa leaders, though the cost in trust and lives would echo through the years to come. The journey to Jacksboro became a grim procession that would be remembered for generations. Colonel Mackenzie's soldiers formed a tight perimeter around their prisoners, their rifles ready. As they moved through hostile territory, the captured chiefs, their wrists and ankles bound in heavy iron shackles, rode in silence, all except for Satanka. The old warrior's response to captivity would become the stuff of frontier legend. In a display of savage determination that shocked even the hardened soldiers, Satanta began gnawing at the flesh of his own arms, tearing at his skin in a desperate attempt to slip free of the shackles. Blood ran down his forearms as he worked with animal-like intensity, ignoring all commands to stop. The gruesome spectacle ended abruptly when he suddenly lunged at a nearby soldier. A single shot rang out, and Satanka's body crumpled to the dusty Texas soil. His death cast a pall over the remaining prisoners. Satanta and Big Tree rode the rest of the way in submissive silence. The arrival at Jacksboro Jail marked the beginning of a new chapter in frontier justice. The surviving chiefs were housed in heavy chains, their movements restricted and closely watched by guards who remembered Satanka's final act of defiance. The timing of these events, coinciding with General Sherman's inspection tour, struck many as more than mere coincidence. Here was a chance to demonstrate that the law could reach even into the wild frontier. The transformation of the frontier was immediate and profound. Settlers who had lived in constant fear began to breathe easier. Farms that had lain fallow due to raid concerns sprang to life with new crops. Houses and barns rose where before no one dared to build, though raids would continue. They never again carried the terrifying boldness of the Salt Creek Massacre. The Kiowa had learned a harsh lesson about the changing balance of power in Texas. When July arrived, Jacksboro transformed into a center of legal drama. Judge Charles Seward presided over what would become one of the most significant trials in Texas frontier history. The prosecution was led by S.T. Lanham, representing the government's determination to establish rule of law in the territory. The defense team, consisting of Thomas Ball from Jacksboro and Lawyer Wolfirk of Weatherford, ensured that even these notorious raiders would receive proper legal representation. The courtroom itself became a study in contrast and tension. The prisoners, still in chains, were surrounded by armed guards, whose presence served both to prevent escape and protect the defendants from potential vigilante justice. The state built its case on powerful testimony from 3 key witnesses. Tom Brazil, one of the surviving Teamsters who had witnessed the massacre firsthand; Indian Agent Tatum, who had heard Satana's boastful confession; and General Grierson of the United States Army, whose military expertise lent weight to the proceedings. The trial proceeded with meticulous attention to legal procedure. Every step was carefully documented, every witness thoroughly examined. The 12 jurors selected from the most respected members of the community sat in stern attention as the evidence unfolded before them. The proceedings carried historic weight. This was not just about punishing a raid, but about establishing the supremacy of civil law over frontier justice. The courthouse was packed daily with spectators, many of whom had suffered personal losses in Indian raids, yet remarkably, the atmosphere remained one of solemn judicial process, rather than vengeful chaos. The community seemed to understand that this trial represented something larger than revenge. It was about bringing the rule of law to a lawless frontier. The 12 men, who would decide the fate of the Kiowa chiefs, represented the backbone of frontier society. T.W. Williams, John Cameron, Everett Johnson, H.B. Verner, Stanley Cooper, William Hensley, J. Brown, Peyton Lynn, Peter Hart, Don Brown, L.P. Bunch, and James Cooley. Each man carried the weight of their community's future on their shoulders. These weren't just random settlers. They were men known for their unwavering integrity and sharp minds, carefully chosen for this historic responsibility. Each witness faced intense scrutiny from both sides, their testimonies picked apart word by word, the defense attorneys, showing remarkable dedication to their controversial clients, fought with the same vigor they would have shown for any white defendant. They explored every possible angle, challenged every assumption, and presented alternative interpretations of events that might cast doubt on their client's guilt. When S.W. T. Lanham rose to deliver the prosecution's closing argument, the courtroom fell silent. Lanham, whose reputation would later earn him the governor's seat, built his case like a master craftsman, each piece of evidence interlocked perfectly with the next, supported by testimony from witnesses whose credibility was beyond reproach. His logical, measured delivery made the case seem insurmountable. Then came the moment that would be recorded in Texas history, Satana's final address to the court. The aging chief rose slowly, his shackled hands raised before him. His first words cut through the tension like a knife. "I cannot speak with these things upon my wrist, like I am a squaw." The chains rattled softly as he gestured, a sound that emphasized the stark reality of his situation. Looking around the courtroom with dark, penetrating eyes, Satanta acknowledged the presence of the settlers, Famla's brave squaws and papooses, as he called them. His voice carried both pride and resignation as he spoke of his past friendship with white settlers, dramatically pointing to the height of a boy to indicate how long he had maintained peaceful relations. The chief's strategy shifted between defiance and conciliation. He spoke of his tribe's mockery, calling him squaw for his friendly relations with the Tahana Texans. In a bold move, he offered to personally execute 3 other chiefs, Sidunk, Lone Wolf, and others whom he blamed for the violence. His voice grew stronger as he asserted his position as a medicine and tribal leader, emphasizing his influence over his warriors. Santa's final offer revealed both diplomatic skill and desperate pragmatism. He proposed a clear boundary at the Red River, promising to wash out the spots of blood and make it a white land. But this olive branch came with a veiled threat. His execution, he warned, would be like a spark in the prairie, making big fire burn heap. The jury's deliberation was brief. When they returned with their verdict, guilty of murder in the first degree, with death as punishment, the tension that had built throughout the trial finally broke. The courtroom erupted in thunderous approval, the sound of justice being served according to the settlers present. The verdict marked not just the end of a trial, but a turning point in the relationship between 2 civilizations colliding on the Texas frontier. The verdict resonated far beyond the walls of the Jacksboro courthouse. This wasn't merely a murder trial. It was a watershed moment that would reshape the relationship between settlers and Native Americans across the Texas frontier. For the first time, tribal chiefs faced judgment in a civilian court, marking a fundamental shift in how the American legal system dealt with frontier violence. Life on the frontier had been marked by a particular kind of terror that few outside the territory could comprehend. Settlers lived in perpetual fear, never knowing when raiders might appear on the horizon. Every crack of a twig in the night, every distant dust cloud could signal an impending attack. Unlike conventional warfare, these raids followed no rules of engagement. Captives faced not just death, but elaborate torture. Their suffering, prolonged for the raiders' entertainment. The raiders, shaped by generations of warfare, and a culture that celebrated martial prowess viewed such actions not as crimes, but as demonstrations of courage and skill. The death sentence handed down by the court, execution scheduled for September 1, 1871, seemed to offer closure to the terrorized settlements. However, Agent Tatum at Fort Sill saw dangerous implications in this verdict. His letters to General Sherman and District Attorney Lanham revealed a deep understanding of both the immediate situation and its potential consequences. In his correspondence, Tatum laid out a pragmatic argument against execution. If they are kept as prisoners, he wrote, the Indians will hope to have them released, which will be a restraining influence upon their actions. He understood that hope could be a powerful tool for peace. The prospect of their chief's eventual release might keep the Cayuga from further violence. Conversely, he warned that executions would likely trigger wholesale slaughter as warriors sought revenge. Tatham's insights into Kiowa psychology proved particularly compelling. He identified two fundamental traits that needed to be considered: a fondness for revenge and a dread of confinement. For warriors accustomed to roaming vast prairies, he argued, life imprisonment represented a fate worse than death. This punishment would not only serve justice, but might actually save lives by deterring future raids without provoking immediate retaliation. His argument extended beyond mere practicality. Invoking Christian principles, Tatum suggested that life imprisonment better aligned with religious values, leaving final judgment to divine authority rather than human courts. This moral dimension resonated with Judge Charles Seward, who added his voice to those recommending clemency. Governor Davis's August 2 proclamation, commuting the death sentences to life imprisonment, reflected this complex balancing act between justice and pragmatism. The decision came at a crucial moment in frontier history. The Comanche and Kiowa had grown increasingly aggressive, pushing settler communities to the brink of collapse. Texas, stripped of resources following the Civil War, could offer little protection. Meanwhile, federal authorities pursued a conciliatory policy that seemed to reward violence rather than prevent it. Sherman's timely inspection tour had exposed the bankruptcy of this approach. The wagon train massacre, occurring just hours after his passage through the territory, demonstrated the futility of appeasing raiders who viewed negotiation as weakness. The successful prosecution of Satanta and Big Tree offered a new model for maintaining order, one that combined firm justice with strategic mercy. The aftermath of the trial brought permanent changes to the frontier. Satanta and Big Tree's brazen boasts about the massacre had backfired spectacularly. Even as they stood at the agency, the stolen mules still in their possession, they couldn't have imagined how their actions would reshape the territory. Congress eventually compensated Captain Fields for his losses through special legislation.